Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon still, I guess it is. Welcome to the Goldsboro City Council work session of Monday, April 17, 2023. And at this time, I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Ham.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Polak.
Present.
Councilwoman Jones.
Present.
Councilman Broadway.
Present.
Councilwoman Matthews.
Present.
Councilman Gaylor.
Present.
Councilman Batts.
Here. Okay, we're all here tonight, and first thing we'll do is ask for adoption of the minutes. Of the agenda. I will say that we do have a closed item session to speak to on potential litigation. Is there any other request to change or amend the agenda? If not, all in motion to adopt the agenda, please signify by raising your hand. Okay. The agenda is adopted. We have no old business, so we'll go right into the new business, which is GWTA funding request. Mr. Willis.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Okay.
One more.
There we go. So this evening I'm presenting a budget request for Goldsboro to consider. And the Goldsboro Wayne Transportation Authority, as you know, is a public transportation authority. It's made up half of the city of Goldsboro and half of Wayne County, and we are designated to provide public transportation services in the service area here. And the request tonight is to increase our budget from what has been about $300,000 a year to $350,000 a year. And I'll go through that in the presentation. This budget request was unanimously approved by the Board of Directors for GWTA. So why fund this request? The city bus service in Goldsboro is a very basic and necessary service for people. The service makes connections for folks that you otherwise would just take for granted in your personal life. If you did not have a car this evening, would you even be at this meeting? We have a fantastic community college. We have a fantastic senior center. We have fantastic medical services, dialysis, job opportunities. None of those things exist for you if you're not able to access those. And so the city bus service provides basic needs access for many of our residents. And the bus service as it exists now, we're a small urban area and we're fortunate to have bus service. And that bus service is stretched as it is. It's a 1 hour headway of a bus service, and the bus service does a lot of looping to try to cover as much of the community as possible. And it's a minimum number of routes on the bus service. So it's a very minimum service. What GWTA has experienced, as most others have, is increases in the cost to operate. We came within 1% of our budget last year in expenses, and the budget increased only 1% into the fiscal year that we're in now. So it was a very tight budget. It's a very tight budget again this year. We've seen fuel costs increase tremendously. We all have. It's at least 25% higher, probably more than it was before the pandemic. Maintenance cost is up. Providers are charging more for maintenance. Our vehicles are aging, and it's costing us more to maintain them. I would say 5 to 10% more in maintenance costs for those vehicles. Labor costs are up. Staff are working overtime. We're probably 10% ahead of our budget for salaries for our staff, with people working overtime in the budget year that we're in now. It is very difficult to hire, attract, and keep drivers right now. It's very difficult. We're all experiencing it. It's not just in public transportation. I will give you an example. Last week, a Greyhound driver came into the transfer center. We provide connections for Greyhound. The driver came in, he said, I work for Bolt. Bolt is contracted to Greyhound. Greyhound can't cover all the routes, so they've given Bolt 8 routes to cover. Bolt can only cover 3 of the 8. This is one of the 3 that we're supposed to cover. Sir, I don't know where I am. They drove me on Uber from Norfolk, and they've put me up in Raleigh for 2 weeks. so that I can drive this route. And I don't know what they're going to do after that. That's what Greyhound is experiencing. It is grim to find drivers right now. So we need to be able to attract and keep our drivers in our workforce. There is a significant opportunity to leverage additional federal grant funds. The infrastructure bill that we've been looking for over a decade has passed, and there is over $240,000 more money available now for this urbanized area than there was before. That's federal money coming here to do what we need it to do, but in order to get some of that money, we have to come up with local funds to do that. Demand for our ADA services and our dial ride services is very expensive. It's when we have to go out and send a van to provide a service for someone who can't use the bus service. It's also a civil right. So we have to meet the disability needs in the community. And so that is a very expensive service to provide. Wheelchair ridership is way up for GWTA. We are seeing probably at least a 25% increase in people who are disabled riding the service. Now, what about Wayne County? Well, Wayne County last year approved basically a 33% increase. And Wayne County pays for services mostly by paying for trips. They buy trips. It's different. So trips went from $15 to $20. So they increased what they're paying by 33% based on demand. So, and also the recovery funds. We did get recovery funds, and I can talk more about those. We have programmed those one-time costs for replacing vehicles and saving match money, so we would not be asking Goldsboro to match to replace some of the vehicles. So what will we do with the funds? $50,000. We believe that we could leverage $115,000 of those additional dollars from federal transit with that $50,000. So it would be a net of $165,000 increase in our budget, about a 12% increase over the year we're in now. We would look at raises and incentives to attract and keep employees. As I mentioned, we are not competitive in the job market. I would say probably 15% below where we should be. The service is not as reliable. The performance is not as good as it should be because people are calling out. And so with attracting that workforce, the service will improve for the riders. I provided a handout on our customer service surveys that we do every year, and you should have that in your packet. And our riders are very, very appreciative, you will see, and understanding to have the bus service. But the one thing, and it's improved over last year, but the one thing they really are asking is better on-time performance. And part of that is when you're short on drivers. And so that was what we did most poorly on. Very positive comments you will see from our customers appreciating the service. So what are you getting? We're going to maintain the service just like it is now with that money. That is the goal. That's 5 fixed routes on 1 hour headways. The ADA and the complimentary paratransit service behind that. The service runs Monday through Friday, 5:30 to 6:30. And then on Saturday, we run 9:30 to 6:30. So it's a reduced service level on Saturday. And so what if the funds aren't approved? And if we don't have more funds, then we would go back to our board of directors, half of which are Goldsboro staff or Goldsboro council members, and we would say, here's what we have, here are our options, what can we afford to not do? And so some of those options, obviously it's going to reduce access and mobility for the riders that we have now. Whatever we do, whatever cut, it would impact those lives. We could see reduced hours and days of operations. We could see reduced coverage on those existing routes where some of that looping is occurring. We could reduce the number of routes. We could try to combine some of the routes that we're running now. We could look to eliminate the citywide dollar ride service, not the ADA portion. So how much that would actually save is actually questionable, but we could look to do that. So those are some of the things that we would consider. I would have to recommend a balanced budget to the board, and how could we achieve that without these funds. So I went through that pretty quickly, and I'd be glad to try to answer your questions. Thank you for your time.
Right.
What is a dial ride service?
Yes, sir. And so the fixed right bus, as you're all familiar with, is the traditional bus service. A dial-a-ride service is very similar to what we do with the county, and that's where someone will call ahead and say, I need to go from here to there, and I'll pay $5. So rather than $1 to ride the bus, they'll pay the $5, and we go to their home, and we take them to where they're going within the city limits of Goldsboro. And typically, not always, but many of those are ADA individuals who cannot get to the bus service, or they're willing to pay $5 instead of $1.
Is that a round trip? $5?
No, sir. That's each way.
I was going to ask that question. Thank you.
I would just like to thank you for all that it does, because I have ridden on the buses. I did not realize that as many people use it for their doctor appointments. And I've been on every route. And when I was sitting there, this lady gets off, and I'm going like, because I'm not going anywhere, I'm just riding just to, see how it works. And I said, oh my goodness, she's going to a doctor's appointment. It really does impact the community. It's something that we really need. I did want to ask you Saturday's route, because of, I know that it does go to Mount Olive. So Saturday's route, will it go to Mount Olive, to the library?
No, ma'am. We do a Mount Olive connector and circulator service with a separate grant. It's not the same grant, and it's not the same funding that is Goldsboro. And the Mount Olive connector and circulator is a 5-day-a-week service. That's all that Mount Olive could afford.
Yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yes, ma'am. Now it is possible potentially to get a county rural public trip to go to Mount Olive, but we would not be running the connector service that you're probably familiar with.
Yeah, and I do know that you have a lot of part-time people that really work overtime.
Yes, ma'am.
You have some very committed people.
We are very fortunate.
Yes.
We are very fortunate.
On your handout here, on the last page, you speak to 2 buses that were ordered on August 22. And that there, as I understand by reading this, the $989,000 is covered entirely by CARES funding. Is that correct?
And let me see if I can get to it. I'm sorry.
Would you speak to that slide, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So last August, the board approved that we order 2 new buses. You're familiar with the Gillig buses, the bigger buses that we operate.
Right.
And those are way out of useful life. This one here has over 300,000 miles on it. So the 2 of those, the community was able to leverage ARA funds and get those at 100% back in 2009. And so very fortunate to get buses like that. We have an opportunity to do that again. It'll be another 10 years. And so the board approved, and we ordered 2 of those buses for $989,246 at 100%. So we would not ask Goldsboro to help replace those. The replacement match would have been 20%. And so in order to replace those vehicles, we would have had to have asked for $197,849. And we thought that using recovery funds for these one-time expenses and just focusing on operations for recurring expenses is what we would do. So there are 6 smaller remaining vehicles. There's about $850,000 left in those CARES funds. Probably it's not going to be enough. It was going to be enough, but vehicle costs are up at least 50% over what they were before. So I probably TMI there, but
so the 2 buses you ordered, were those the Easy Rider style buses?
Yes, sir. The 2 that we ordered, that's the floor plan. That's the 35-foot version of the bus. The bus we're ordering is only 30. It will not have 2 doors, so we don't need the full size of that bus, but that is the bus, and it will be a 30-foot version instead of the 35 that you see in the picture. But that's exactly how it will look, and we would have the GWTA logos on it. They brought it here and had some of the drivers drive it, and they love it. It drives very smoothly.
That bus, what's the passenger count?
So the one that you're seeing is 27, and each wheelchair station, there's 3 on that one, will take up 3 seats. I think it goes down to 24 for the 35 or the 30-footer.
And the Gillig style bus, what's the seating capacity?
It's comparable. It's basically the same size
So
vehicle.
then my question is, do you have the passenger requirement to justify these large buses?
So on our purple route and on our blue route, there are times when we need a higher capacity vehicle.
Than the smaller ones?
Sir?
You're saying you need a higher capacity than the smaller buses that we normally see driving around town here?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. There are times, it's sort of like the roads, when, you can have one lane is enough on the highway most of the time, but when it's rush hour, you gotta have 2 lanes.
So you use the larger buses for those times?
Yes, sir. And we would operate these more because they're going to be new. The Gilligs are starting to break down. So we're operating them only when we absolutely have to. But it's a capacity issue, and you need to have enough capacity for your busiest time.
Just aside from buses, what about stations, covered pickup stations?
The shelters.
What about shelters? That's what.
Yes, sir. And so one of the opportunities with these CARES funds is I believe that these 6 remaining vehicles, we're not going to be able to fund them all with the 850. We'll probably be able to fund 3 with some left over. And my thinking is that once we know what's left over, we could invest in shelters and benches and things of that nature. But
No,
I
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I need to stop. But I just wanted to replace these vehicles that are aging out.
Yeah. Going back to the shelters, I know we've talked about this in years past, and we always talk about looking at the ridership, how many were picked up, and I know y'all carry, you track that information, how many passengers you pick up at each side, et cetera, et cetera. If you have one passenger standing out there in the rain, that's bad enough. That's a need for a shelter. But if it's a shelter spot that's used more frequently by more people, then certainly that has a priority as well there. So,
Yes, sir.
especially during these cold winter months when it's raining and so forth.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I do have a question. Looking at this as being a 10-year window of useful life, have you looked at the trend of electric moving forward, the sense of maintenance and all that? That's something I kind of want to touch on.
Yes, sir. And there are grant opportunities for they're called low-no and electric vehicles.
Yes, sir.
And my peers in the larger urban areas tell me it takes twice as many vehicles to do the same work. Not that it's not a good investment, not that it's not the right thing to do for the community, but because of the charging and the time that it takes. If you're going to replace one vehicle, you're going to need 2 of those to do it.
I got you.
So, and the other consideration is our community, how much capacity we have to work on those vehicles right now is certainly exciting and opportunity for the future, but the timing for us, we may want to let them work some of those things out first.
Thank you.
Yes,
I
sir.
rode on an electric bus last year, I believe it was up in Durham a couple of times. Pretty nice to ride, but very expensive to get and to maintain and so forth. You gotta have the capacity to justify it. Well, not capacity, but ridership to justify it. Right?
Yes,
So,
sir.
any other questions?
What are you going to do with the Gillies? Are you going to keep them for reserves or sell them off?
So we'll consider keeping one in reserve if it's in good enough shape, but we'll probably just put them on state surplus.
Any other questions? Okay, sir, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, we have no further new business, so we'll go into the consent agenda at this time. Mr. Simon?
Yes, sir. First item is operating budget amendment, FY 22-23, Finance Director, Ms. Quinn.
Good
Evening,
evening.
Mayor and Council. Tonight I have an operating budget amendment with several items to kind of clean up now that we're about 3/4 of the way through the year. In the Goldsboro Event Center, Ms. Felicia Brown, our Parks and Recreation Director, has requested an appropriation of $7,500 for additional part-time salaries that are needed to handle the events at the Goldsboro Event Center. As many of you are aware, they're pretty much booked up. I mean, I think they have one more weekend date, or they might not even have that anymore. And so the revenues that have come in, I think, are about 84,000. We had them budgeted at about 44. So, I mean, they've well outpaced the estimated budgeted revenue amount. So the additional part-time salaries will actually just be an appropriation of the building event center revenue. So that's where that's getting paid from. In multi-peril insurance in the general fund, so when we start this budget process early in February, I'm estimating the premiums. And basically there are changes that are due to rates and exposures and things like that that vary from organization to organization. And several organizations were short an amount that probably it hurts them as far as their budget, so I wanted to make sure we cleaned that up so we didn't have any kind of budget violations. And the ones where we were short in the estimate that I had provided was the GEC, Information Technology, Public Works Administration, Buildings and Grounds, Solid Waste, Parks and Rec, and Police. And so I've included an additional appropriation to what we call multi-peril insurance expense, and this will be funded with an additional appropriation in interest income revenue in the general fund. Within finance, we have several additional items that need appropriation. The finance department, our budget handles all of the unemployment claims for all of the city, and last year it was only 500, so that's what we budgeted. We actually ended up with unemployment claims of about $8,200, so we need to appropriate those funds, and that's coming from additional interest revenue. And you'll find that's where we're getting all these funds from, because as you know, interest rates went from like 0.25% to like over 5%. So we've been very fortunate that the cash that you see in that cash and investment report every single month, that we've been able to collect a sizable amount of additional interest income. So that's where we're funding these expenses from. And then I expect that the first billing for the fiscal 22 audit will be received sometime probably in June. And so I want to make sure that we have an appropriation there to pay that bill, because what we have left will pay through the fiscal 21 audit. That appropriation is $22,000, and again will be paid out of interest revenue, interest income. Our finance department has also been responsible for the administration and program management of the ARPA grant funding, and we are asking for an additional appropriation to fund the contract labor that we have helping my staff that's doing all the paperwork in an amount of $22,300. I actually filed the ARPA report that was due 4/30. That's been filed, and now we're trying to get all that paperwork finished up, because we're talking about thousands of timesheets that we're having to deal with, and that help is needed. So we've got Ms. Regina Clark is the one that's been helping with the paperwork, and she needs the additional labor to help her get done. But we will be done at the end of fiscal 23, which is a blessing to say the least. Also in preparing the June 30 estimates for the budget, it looked to me that the NCVTS fees, because they look like they're going to run short, and North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles, it's a floating percentage, so it's not, we can't just say it costs 4%, it floats. So it looks like we're going to be short about $5,890, so I'm asking for an additional appropriation to make sure that we have those fees covered. There is an additional appropriation for fidelity bonds. On July 7th, the state legislature enacted SL 2022-53, which made significant changes in GS 15929, which is the fidelity bonds. It required that the finance officer and the tax collector to be bonded. The threshold per the general statute was $50,000, but then they raised it to an amount of 10% of your annual budget, which of course for Goldsboro would be $1 million. And of course that cost, I mean, it comes with a cost, or you raise it from a $50,000 bond to $1 million bond. So myself and the tax collector, Ms. Joy Newell, we had to pay the additional premiums to be in compliance with the law, and that additional appropriation was $6,760. And as I said, all of these appropriations that I've mentioned will be funded with additional interest income. In the police department, Chief Mike West has requested an additional appropriation to fund the upfit of police cars in the amount of $63,720. And actually, we had a miscommunication, and I'm going to bring back another budget amendment the second meeting of May. He actually needed more in tune of about, I think, 80,000 or 85,000, somewhere in that range. But the 63,000 that I'm appropriating here is going to be funded solely with insurance proceeds. The additional appropriation he's asking for is probably going to come out of the interest income revenue, but it's not reflected in this amendment. So I just wanted you to be aware, if you're going to say, well, Catherine, you just came in April and asked us for money, but we had a miscommunication. So I'll get that corrected when I do the May budget amendment. In stormwater, we have the final appropriation that we need to do in order to pay for the stormwater assessment that CDM Smith is requiring. It's the $221,495, and we will appropriate fund balance in the stormwater fund. I took a quick peek at the stormwater fund balance, and it's somewhere around 1.6 million. So we have sufficient fund balance to handle this request. This will take care of the maximum contract amount for CDM Smith that we were required to fund. In compost, Bert Sherman, we're kind of out of order, but he's going to be presenting an item later that he's asking for a tandem dump truck for the compost facility in the amount of $171,000 out of the utility capital reserve. So my budget amendment actually appropriates that capital for him, and it appropriates it out of the utility capital reserve. In travel and tourism, with occupancy tax, they received a reimbursement of $5,037 from the NC Tennis Association in November of 2022, and these were for event costs related to the tennis event that was held here in Goldsboro. And we will appropriate the revenue as a local grant and then fund additional event costs in the travel and tourism budget. So that's all I have for the operating amendment.
I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
I don't know if this is your answer or Manager Salmon's answers this, but can you speak to what's involved in the upfit of the police vehicles?
And maybe that might be Chief West, might be the better person.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you sitting
Yeah.
over there, Chief. You were hidden by our assistant manager.
We've received, I think it's 8 vehicles, but they're from previous budgets just due to manufacturing issues and demand. They were slow to come in. Now that they're here, we've got to upfit them, and it's everything from the MARC units would be light bars, radios. The radios are going to be dual band compliant with what's coming down the road for us, but it's the emergency equipment, radios, the computers, just the upfit of the vehicles themselves. But it's not vehicles we purchased recently, it's ones that have been purchased in previous budgets that are just arriving.
So do we budget for these additional upfit items when we request?
We did,
funds?
and then out of last year's budget, it was my responsibility to get a PO to hold the money and roll it over, and me and my staff overlooked that and didn't put that in place to roll the fund over. So we were looking to where we could get the funds, and we knew we had vehicles that were total losses in crashes and stuff like that, that there was some insurance proceeds that came from that, so we respectfully requested those funding.
So it would have been budgeted in the past. It didn't roll over into this year to pay for it, so it went to fund balance. We don't need to pull it back from fund balance because they have some insurance proceeds that will cover this.
You answered the second part of the question, is what happened to the monies that you didn't use, but they went back into the fund balance and then they're now being used to okay. One other question, not for you, sir. On the travel and tourism money,
Yes, sir.
this $5,000 that was received from the Tennis Association, I would like us to give careful thought about how that money is going to be spent.
I think it's already spent. It was already spent in her event costs.
Her event for the tennis?
Right, so
Okay, well, that's the part I was making.
Yes,
If it
sir.
was money left over or reimbursed from the Tennis Association, our courts are in such bad shape that it should go back into the tennis courts.
She actually expended it for different events and things like that related directly to the Tennis Association. So really, it's just a reimbursement more than anything. So it's not going to give you any extra capacity.
Any questions? Okay, ma'am, you have
I've
another?
got one question, and it's really, Catherine, not for you, but hadn't we all talked previously about resurfacing the tennis courts there?
Yes, it's in the budget for Parks and Recs to not resurface, but to fill in the cracks at the hard courts in
Right.
Herman Park.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna move on
Still
to my
up.
next one.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So my next item is a grant project budget amendment for the Stormwater Capital Projects Fund. And again, this is dealing with the CDM Smith contract. You know, council was presented this information, and they approved the contract of $1,567,900. And it was spread over fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. So we now have to amend the project fund to allow for the $221,000 that I just spoke to you about in the operating budget amendment. We're going to increase the revenue to 21, and then we're going to increase the expenditure so we can finish. We've got to do one change order on the contract in order for CDM Smith to finish up, and I think they're going to be finished up soon. I'm just not sure the when part, but this will take care of the financial piece of that. With the closing, so the Vine Street was one of the projects that the council approved. It came in under budget because Rick Fletcher's forced labor, they took care of it. So we've actually got about $13,000 that's going to be transfers. We're going to close out Vine Street, and then we're going to put what's left over, we're going to offset that amount. So they'll actually have about $235 in the contract for the CDM Smith. If they don't use all of that, then that'll get closed out, and then whatever council decides later on, whatever your next stormwater project is, we'll use it to fund that. So that's pretty much it for that one. Straightforward.
Okay.
Okay.
Item L.
Okay, so my next one, it's a grant project budget ordinance for the state grants miscellaneous grant project funds. It's like it said the same thing over and over again. So with the North Carolina General Assembly, when they adopted the budget, they included a grant to the city of Goldsboro for $150,000. $100,000 was for capital or equipment. It was very generic. And another $50,000 was designated for parks and recreation. And the council at the November 7th meeting actually approved 2 resolutions to accept the grants. Now, our Parks and Rec Director, Ms. Felicia Brown, she is in the process of spending that money now. And so she has submitted her scope of work. The state approved it. The state sent the grant agreement. The manager signed it, and then they funded it. So the city's got its $50,000. And so at this time, we need to appropriate it. That's why, and they specifically require in the grant paperwork that it be accounted for in a special revenue fund. So that's why you have this separate. And so we're appropriating the $50,000 now so that Felicia can and her staff can start meeting the terms of the agreement. At what point in time the council decides the $100,000, what it plans on doing, I will come back and bring a budget amendment in order to appropriate the revenue and the expense so we can execute the grant. But we haven't executed the scope of work or the grant agreement or anything like that. Scope of work has got to be first. But at this point in time, we really can't wait anymore. So I've got the $50,000 here in this special revenue fund for you to approve.
Any questions? Comments? Okay.
Okay. And then my last item is at the council retreat, council made decision that we would require audits of our nonprofits that had more than $200,000 in revenue. And so I'm just amending this policy that the council approved, I think it was back in January, and I struck out all the language, and I think it's on page 9 of the agreements in red, and just basically put that the council said $200,000 in revenue and audit will be required. So we do have several nonprofits that we're still trying to fund in fiscal year 23, and then at what point we trend over into fiscal 24, I'll come back and amend the policy to say we're using a third-party administrator, and that should take care of it. So,
Any questions?
but that's it. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thanks.
Chief West, road closures.
Chief again.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members.
Good afternoon.
Item N on the agenda is the Dillard Goldsboro Alumni Parade temporary street closure. The Dillard Goldsboro Alumni and Friends 68th Homecoming has events scheduled throughout the weekend to include the Dillard Goldsboro Alumni and Friends annual homecoming parade. Street closing requests for Saturday, May 27th of 2023 is as follows. For the parade route, north on Center Street at Spruce Street to Mulberry Street, going around the traffic circle, heading south on Center Street back to Spruce Street, ending at Spruce Street. The staging area, streets to be closed for staging, is Pine Street between James Street and John, Spruce Street between James Street and Center Street Street between Elm and Center Street. Additional closure recommended by the police department to manage traffic flow will encompass Mulberry Street from James Street to John Street, Walnut Street from James Street to John Street, Chestnut Street from James Street to John Street, Spruce Street from James Street to John Street, Pine Street from James Street to John Street, and Center Street at Elm Street. Parking restrictions: no parallel parking on Center Street from Pine Street to Ash Street. The times requested for the street closing is from 8 a.m. until 11:30 a.m. Police have indicated that traffic will be restricted from 7 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. and all traffic stopped at 9:30 a.m. The actual parade will begin at 10 a.m. and end at approximately 11:30 a.m. As with all downtown events, affected city departments will be contacted and the following concerns are to be addressed. All intersections remain open for the police department traffic control. 14-foot fire lane is to be maintained to provide access for fire and emergency vehicles. All activities, changes in plans, etc. will be coordinated with the police department. Police and fire department should be involved in logistical aspects of the event. It's recommended by motion to grant the request temporary street closure of the sections of Pine Street, John Street, Center Street, James Street, Spruce Street, Chestnut Street, Walnut Street, and Mulberry Street for the Dillard Goldsboro Alumni and Friends 68th Homecoming Parade staging area and parade route from 8 a.m. until 11:30 a.m. on Saturday, May 27th, 2023, as stated above. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, sir.
Item O is another temporary street closure for the Jams Out Juneteenth. Celebration of freedom, music artists, bouncy houses, vendors, and food trucks. The event will be hosted at the Hub and Freedom Field from 3:30 p.m. until 8 p.m. on June 17th of 2023. The event is sponsored by Curtis Media Group, and they are requesting the closure of the southbound and northbound lanes of South Center Street from Chestnut Street to Elm Street from 12 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. As with all downtown events, affected city departments will be contacted, and the following concerns are to be addressed. All intersections remain open for the police department for traffic control. 14-foot fire lane is to be maintained to provide access for fire and emergency vehicles. All activities, changes in plans, etc. will be coordinated with the police department. The police and fire department should be involved in logistical aspects of this event. It's recommended by motion grant the requested temporary closing of South Center Street from Chestnut Street to Elm Street as stated above. Questions?
Any questions?
Okay, and finally, item P is the Center Street Jam Concert Series temporary street closure. The City of Goldsboro's Downtown Development Department, in conjunction with the Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation, looks forward to hosting the annual Center Street Jam Summer Concert Series. The Center Street Jam is a community favorite event bringing crowds of 1,500 to 3,500 to enjoy live music, fellowship, food from local vendors. As always, Center Street Jam concerts are free, family-friendly, and open to the public. The events will be hosted every other Thursday from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. at the Hub in the 200 block of South Center Street. Event dates are May 4th, May 18th, June 1st, June 15th, June 29th, July 13th, July 27th, and August 10th. For the safety of the event goers, the Downtown Development Department and DGDC are requested the closure of the northbound lane of South Center Street from Spruce to Chestnut, and a partial closure of East Chestnut Street from Center Street to the Chestnut Street PD parking lot entrance from 4 p.m. until 9:30 p.m. As with all downtown events, affected city departments will be contacted and the following concerns are to be addressed. All intersections remain open for police department traffic control. 14-foot fire lanes to be maintained to provide access for fire and emergency vehicles. All activities, changes in plans, etc. will be coordinated through the police department. The police and fire department and public works departments are to be involved in logistical aspects of the event. It's recommended by motion to grant the requested temporary closing of the northbound lanes of South Center Street from Spruce to Chestnut Streets, and a partial closure of the East Chestnut Street from Center Street to the Chestnut Street PD parking lot entrance as stated above. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Chief.
All right, thank you.
You have 3 planning items. Interim Director Austin Brinkley.
Good afternoon, Council. First item we have is the contiguous annexation petition for the Perry Real Estate Group to set the public hearing. At the council meeting on April 3rd, council instructed the city clerk to certify sufficiency on this request. On April the 4th, the city clerk was able to provide me with that certificate of sufficiency. At this time, we request that council would set the public hearing for this annexation request for May the 1st, This is for a property located at the intersection of New Hope Road and Hare Road.
Any questions?
Second item that planning has tonight is the annexation ordinance revision. This is a revision to the ordinance specifically regarding the election district for the Magnolia Grove subdivision. This came to City Council on November the 7th, where a public hearing was held about the annexation of Magnolia Grove. Council approved this annexation to become effective on December 30th of 2022. That original annexation ordinance that approved did not specify which election district this would go into. After staff consultation with Pointer and Sproul, staff is recommending that the Magnolia Grove subdivision belong to Electoral District 5. And so what we're looking for tonight is council to revise this annexation ordinance to have that annexed area all within one electoral district.
We'll stop you right there and make sure our council members have an idea of where we're talking about. You don't have a map, do you?
Do not have a map, no sir, but Magnolia Grove is located on the east side of 11th Street between Norwood Avenue and Inglewood Drive. So it's split on either side of that road there. It falls in between District 3 and 5 is kind of the area around which it falls within. Pointer Sproul recommends it being all within District 5 just so you don't have a neighborhood split between two separate election districts.
I was going to speak to that because just to kind of put it in perspective where everybody knows where this location is, kind of past the movie theater, if you're familiar, if I'm correct,
Yes,
off
sir.
11th Street. And right now, currently, my district goes all the way up to William Street. It takes all of 11th Street, William Street, actually back to, what is that, where Greenleaf Church is behind there. I think it's Orange Street and all that. So how would that, I'm guessing, the recommendation cut me out that little slice of ground when I actually have everything that would technically be behind that? I think it's Orange Street, where Greenleaf Church is, which is actually off of William. So you can literally stand in this area and still see my district. So it's kind of weird that little pop out is excluded from District 3. That's I just wanted to point
And
that
Mayor
out.
Pro Tem Pellick, I actually would kind of echo those sentiments only because of the numbers. Look, don't get me wrong, District 5, bring them on. I'm happy to have anybody, but I was already one of the larger districts. I was already disproportionately large whenever we were talking about the redistricting just a few months ago, and already I was at the cap on the heavy end. I don't know that that's a solid move for representation, although I don't have the numbers in front of me. But I would just hesitate ever so slightly to make sure that the numbers do line up.
I would suggest we continue this matter to the next meeting and come back with a map that everybody can see, and the council, two council members as well as the other members of the council have an opportunity to think this matter through. There's no urgency to get it done tonight, is there?
No, sir, there's not. I can get with Pointer Sproul and get those numbers for you. We were just going based off of their recommendation, but I can bring that back to you.
Now, that was my suggestion, that the council's got to support or say no on that.
Then, Mayor, if I may, I'd like to move to, I guess we have to do this in two motions, right? One to amend the agenda as motion today, and then a second motion to table this to a future meeting, right? So I'll make the first motion to amend the agenda for today to move item wherever we are. R out of the consent agenda into an item requiring individual action.
Well, for the next
No,
meeting.
move it.
Just take it off.
To the next
Right, so we don't have to, so we can do it in this one.
Just removing it from the agenda.
I see.
Motion made and second to remove item R in the consent agenda from the agenda tonight. We have a motion made and second. All in favor signify by raising your hand.
Yes, sir. The final planning item tonight is SU 322. This special use permit was denied by City Council May 2nd, 2022. The decision of City Council to deny this was appealed to the Superior Court of Wayne County, and the denial was reversed by the Superior Court. By order of the Superior Court, Council's ordered to approve this special use permit, and it's not eligible for further deliberation or discussion.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Just back up 1 second. When we
Sure.
get to the general meeting, I would ask you to just make a motion to amend the agenda to reflect the removal of R, and then adopt the amended agenda. So we do want to do a second on that, okay? Thank you.
Ron, I have one question. When the Superior Court overrides, I guess for what council would be quasi-judicial,
That's correct.
is that why they override?
Well, yes, the law requires the action to go directly to the Superior Court by writ of certiorari, is what that's called.
Yep.
And when it goes there, he takes a fresh look at everything and decides whether or not it complied with the law. In that situation, as we've discussed, that letter should not have been a basis for the council's decision because it was not introduced into evidence at a public hearing. Only evidence introduced in a public hearing can be used when it's a special use permit situation, because that is a quasi-judicial setting. It's different than a zoning setting. Zoning settings, you can bring other things in your head and other things to the public hearing, because that's a legislative decision.
Oh, okay, that's where I was wondering.
All right, that's why people are sworn in for special use and they're not sworn in for zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Austin. Item T, use of public utility capital reserve to fund the purchase of a replacement dump truck. Director Bert Sherman.
Good evening. How are you folks doing today? Currently, the city owns a 2003 Sterling dump truck assigned to the compost facility. This dump truck is an essential piece of equipment that transports biosolids from the WRF water reclamation facility to the compost facility. The dump truck needs replacement due to the age, the mileage, and the constant repairs. Staff is requesting $171,000 out of the utilities capital reserve to fund the replacement of the compost facility dump truck. The current estimate delivery of this truck would be 2 years. Pricing for the tandem axle dump truck was received from Piedmont Trucking under the NC Sheriff's Association Competitive Bidding Group Heavy Equipment Procurement Program. Staff recommends that the City Council approve the use of the Public Utilities Capital Reserve Fund in the amount of $171,000 to purchase the tandem axle dump truck for the compost facility.
That's out of the current funds, reserve funds, right?
That's correct.
2-year lead time.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Bert. Next item is the fleet and fuel policy. This policy details the management, operations, and maintenance of the City of Goldsboro government-owned and leased vehicles and motorized equipment, and the associated fuel procedures to ensure a safe working environment for employees, positive public image, and protect against liability. The city manager, in coordination with department heads, is responsible for the development and implementation of this policy. Department heads are responsible for the policy task and the development of implementation of appropriate department standard operating procedures. Department heads will authorize the use of city-owned or leased vehicles assigned to their departments to an employee or divisional supervisor via the fleet and fuel policy acknowledgement statement and the department fleet assignment list. Take-home vehicles for emergency on-call employees must be approved by the city manager. This policy covers numerous things: take-home vehicles and climate weather, crash, accidents, reports, drug tests, key responsibility, maintenance, employee accountability, moving violations, equipment citations, insurance reporting, insurance on rented vehicles and motor equipment, driver training, vehicles and motorized equipment replacement, use of city fuel pumps, and the duty to notify of fraud, waste, and abuse. So this policy was put together over the last few months Worked very hard with staff on it. There were 2 additional changes to what was sent out in the agenda package. I want to highlight your attention. We needed to add a statement on city-owned golf carts and gators, which can be driven by 16 to 18-year-olds who retain a valid North Carolina driver's license. And we also wanted to add a statement, Parks and Rec Department and Fire Department, so they can maintain their own vehicles as they currently do. And that was left off the original version. Otherwise, the garage maintains all the vehicles. So it is recommended the council approve the resolution adopting the fleet and fuel policy.
Any questions? Okay.
All right, sir.
Okay, you've seen, or been given a copy of the departmental monthly reports. Does anyone have any comments they want to make or questions? If not, we'll move to closed session.
Yes, sir.
This time, we're going to ask for a motion to go into closed session. And once we do, please vacate the council chambers. Is there a motion?
Making a motion to go into closed session.
Is there a second? Second. Motion made and second. All in favor, signify by raising your hand. Okay. Okay, we're in closed session. Okay, we're back in open session. Is there any further business for the session of the meeting? If not, we'll recess until 7 o'clock.